You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
Have you ever moved into a new home, full of hope, only to discover something that was waiting for you? In this chilling, true-feeling account, a young family escapes city life for the quiet promise of the countryside, only to uncover an ancient, grieving presence tied to local folklore. What begins as subtle unease quickly spirals into a terrifying fight for their child's safety as invisible forces grow bolder, darker, and far more dangerous. This story will grip you with its slow-burn tension, emotional depth, and a haunting twist that lingers long after the final line. Subscribe to Soul Studios for immersive, spine-tingling horror stories, where every shadow has a story, and not every lullaby is meant to soothe. My 2-year-old son's scream tore through the dead silence of our farmhouse at midnight. I vaulted out of bed and sprinted down the dark hallway, heart hammering in my chest. As I threw open the door to his nursery, a blast of frigid air hit me, and I froze at the threshold. The room was in chaos. A dresser drawer slammed shut on its own. One of the dresser drawers yanked itself open and slammed shut repeatedly, as if controlled by unseen hands. Billy stood in his crib, wailing in terror, his tiny knuckles white as he gripped the rails. In the corner, his rocking horse was rocking furiously on its own, knocking against the wall with a dull thud every time it tipped forward. "Billy!" I shouted, rushing forward. My voice was barely audible over the cacophony of crashing furniture and my son's screams. The overhead light flickered madly, casting wild, jerky shadows across the nursery walls. I saw toys levitating off the floor, Billy's teddy bear and wooden blocks swirling in the air as if caught in a tornado. A cold, electrical smell stung my nose, and the hairs on my arms rose with static. Just as I reached the crib, something yanked the bedding right out of my hands. The quilt flew across the room and slapped against the wall. A whispery voice, indecipherable, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, hissed through the chaos. I could feel the presence of something deeply wrong in that room with us, an oppressive force that pressed on my chest and filled me with unspeakable dread. I scooped Billy up into my arms. His little body was trembling violently against me. I could feel his heart pounding as hard as mine. "It's okay, I've got you," I gasped, though I was shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could even protect him. As I backed toward the door, the crib suddenly lurched sideways on its own and toppled over with a crash, splintering wood and scattering pieces across the floor. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. The rocking horse stilled. The flying toys dropped, clattering to the ground. For half a second, there was quiet, except for our ragged breathing. I thought it might be over. But in that half second of silence, a new sound rose, a faint, lilting melody that shouldn't have been there. My blood ran cold as I recognized the tune. It was a lullaby, hummed by a soft female voice coming from the dark corner of the nursery behind us. The melody was hauntingly familiar, the kind of old folk lullaby my own mother used to sing. Yet hearing it now in the middle of this nightmare, it turned my marrow to ice. "Who's there?" I croaked, backing us up against the nursery door. My eyes darted around wildly. In the far corner, where the moonlight didn't quite reach, a tall shadow seemed to quiver. I sensed movement, a shape that was almost human, swaying ever so slightly in time with the lullaby. The voice hummed on, gentle and eerily calm, as if trying to soothe my terrified child, even while tearing our world apart. My courage nearly failed me. Every instinct in me was screaming to run, to get my boy far away from that room. But I couldn't look away from the dark corner. The humming grew a bit louder, the lilting tune echoing as if we stood in a great empty hall instead of a tiny bedroom. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow unfurled unnaturally tall against the wall. Two faint pinpoints of light, eyes, gleamed at me from that darkness. Billy whimpered and buried his face in my neck. That broke the spell. Clutching him tight, I edged along the wall toward the hallway, never turning my back on that corner. The humming stopped abruptly, and for an instant an awful silence fell again. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Suddenly, an invisible force slammed into the door beside us with a deafening bang, as if a fist or an entire body had thrown itself against the wood. The door shuddered on its hinges, nearly hitting me in the shoulder. I yelped and bolted through the doorway, stumbling into the hall with Billy clutched to my chest. The nursery door swung shut violently behind us, cutting off the darkness inside with a final echoing slam. We were in the hallway now, but I didn't feel safe. I backed away from the door, gasping for breath, holding my son, who was still crying, into my pajama shirt. My mind reeled at what I had just witnessed. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. Then a low, inhuman moan wavered through the door, raising every hair on my body and rooting me to the spot in terror. I had never known real fear until that moment, and little did I know, our nightmare was only beginning. A few weeks earlier, in the late summer of 1978, my wife Linda and I moved with Billy into that old farmhouse, dreaming of a fresh start. We had left the bustle of Pittsburgh behind for the promise of country peace in rural West Virginia. The house was a two-story 19th century home with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. Sure, it creaked and groaned at night, and the wiring was outdated, but it sat on a quiet stretch of land by an apple orchard. It felt like the perfect place to raise our little boy away from the dangers of the city. I remember the day we arrived. The August sun was beating down as we carried in boxes, sweating and laughing as we talked about our plans for the place. The interior was dated, wood-paneled walls, green shag carpeting in the living room, and an old brick fireplace that smelled of soot. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Billy toddled around happily on the kitchen's cracked linoleum floor while Linda unpacked dishes. Every now and then he would stop and point at something invisible up near the ceiling, babbling in that earnest toddler language of his. Each time, Linda and I would chuckle it off. Probably just excited by motes of dust in the sunlight, we figured. On our first night, we ate pizza on the living room floor, too tired to set up the dining table. We had no television yet, so we listened to the battery-powered radio quietly playing a Fleetwood Mac song. Crickets chirped outside and a warm breeze rustled the trees. It was calm, almost too calm compared to the constant noise of the city we were used to. After putting a sleepy Billy down in his crib upstairs, I remember standing on the porch with Linda. We gazed at a sky full of stars, something we'd never seen back in Pittsburgh. We felt hopeful. I squeezed her hand and said, "This is the life, huh?" She smiled and nodded. In that moment, neither of us had any idea of the ancient shadow that lurked in our new home, nor the terror that was brewing in the unseen corners of those rooms. That first week went by peacefully. Linda busied herself decorating and baby-proofing, while I started my new job at a local carpentry shop in town. We met a few of the locals. Some exchanged uneasy looks when they learned we'd bought the old Ross farmhouse, muttering about old ghost stories. We brushed it off as small-town superstition. During that time, while clearing out the dusty attic, I found an old hand-carved wooden rocking horse and decided to clean it up for Billy. It was a charming antique piece left behind by the previous owner, and Billy absolutely loved it. He would bounce on its back with a squeal of delight. We took it as a sign that this house had been waiting for a new family like ours. Linda, however, seemed to sense something from the start. "The energy here is different," she commented one night as we lay in bed. I chuckled and teased her for reading too many Gothic novels. She swatted me with a pillow and laughed, but I could tell she was a little uneasy. She insisted on keeping a nightlight on in the hall outside Billy's room, saying it was for him in case he woke up. Still, more than once I caught her peeking in on him in the middle of the night, just to be sure. About a week after moving in, I woke past midnight to the faint chime of Brahms' Lullaby coming from the nursery. This was strange, since Billy's crib mobile wasn't even wound up or hung yet. It was still packed in a box. I crept upstairs, but halfway to the nursery, the soft music abruptly stopped. Peeking in, I found Billy fast asleep and everything in its place. The mobile lay untouched in its box. I tried to shrug it off as imagination, but as I turned to go, I heard a faint hush right by my ear. Shh! There was no one there. My heart hammering, I hurried back to bed and lay awake until dawn, telling myself it had to have been a dream. For a while, we tried to carry on as normal, but the strange occurrences only grew more frequent and harder to ignore. About 2 weeks into our stay, Linda came to me one morning with a pale face and trembling hands. She had been in the kitchen washing dishes at dusk the previous evening while I was still at work. Billy was playing in the den. Suddenly, she heard him start giggling and babbling as if someone were playing with him. Curious, she dried her hands and walked toward the den doorway and froze in her tracks. Through the archway, she could see our son sitting on the carpet, staring up at his rocking horse in the dim light. It was rocking gently on its own, creaking back and forth. And there, half shrouded in shadow behind the rocking horse, Linda swears she saw the figure of a woman. Just for an instant, a tall, thin woman stooping toward Billy, as if to help him off the horse. Linda gasped, and in a blink, the figure was gone. The rocking horse had stopped, and Billy was simply clapping his hands like it was the funniest thing. I could hardly believe what she was saying. A woman in our house? My first thought was that an intruder had somehow snuck inside. We searched every closet and crawl space, every corner of the house, but found no one. All the doors and windows were still locked. Besides, who could vanish into thin air? Linda was so shaken, I didn't dare suggest she imagined it. In my heart, I knew she hadn't. Too many odd things were starting to happen. By this point, I was truly frightened, though I tried not to show it. We discussed the possibility of a prankster or one of the neighbors messing with us. Maybe local teens thought it funny to scare the new folks. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. What Linda saw, what I had heard late at night, none of it was something simple we could explain away. A few nights later, as we were getting ready to put Billy to bed, he looked over my shoulder at the empty nursery doorway and suddenly said, "Night-night, lady," clear as day in his tiny voice. Linda and I both snapped our heads toward the door. Of course, nothing was there. "Sweetie, what lady?" Linda asked gently, kneeling by his crib. Billy just pointed at the doorway and giggled as if someone we couldn't see was playing peekaboo. A cold knot formed in my gut. That night, after we finally got him to sleep, Linda cried quietly in our bedroom, whispering over and over that something wasn't right with the house, that she felt like we were not alone. I held her and tried to be the voice of reason, but my words felt hollow. I was scared too. From then on, I couldn't deny that something was very wrong in our home. Late at night, I began to hear soft footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway, slow and deliberate. Sometimes the floorboards in Billy's room would creak when we were all downstairs, as though an unseen person was moving about. Doors that we knew we had left open would be found closed or vice versa. One afternoon, I even found all of Billy's alphabet blocks and toy cars dumped out of their bin and arranged in a perfect circle on his bedroom rug, a level of precision far beyond what a 2-year-old could do. Then came the night when the lullaby returned. It was just past midnight. I was lying awake listening to the wind outside when I realized the wind had gone still. Yet somewhere in the darkness, I could hear a woman softly humming a tune. I wasn't dreaming. I saw Linda sit up in bed beside me, her eyes wide in the dim glow of our nightlight. She heard it too. The melody drifting through our house was the same folk lullaby I'd heard once before. We both jumped out of bed and raced to Billy's room, panic gripping us. I threw the nursery door open, and Linda rushed past me to the crib. Billy was awake, sitting upright and unusually calm, as if he'd been listening to the lullaby. The room was dark except for the faint orange glow of his nightlight. Nobody else was there. The air felt icy cold against my skin, and I saw the wooden rocking horse in the corner sway as it slowly came to a stop, as if someone had just been riding it. Linda snatched up our son, and he immediately began to cry. Not a normal groggy cry, but a shrill, terrified wail as he clung to his mother. It was as if only now, with us there, he realized something was wrong and finally let himself be afraid. I backed up toward the hallway, scanning the shadows. My eyes caught a flicker of movement just outside the door in the dark landing. I lunged forward, swinging the door fully open to catch whoever it was, but I saw only a trailing hint of darkness slip around the far corner toward the attic stairs. I didn't chase it. I stood there in the doorway, legs like lead. In my mind, I kept hearing that melody, and a voice inside whispered the same thought that Linda voiced moments later. She was here again. The lady our son had talked about. That was the last straw. We had to do something. The next morning, after an anxious, nearly sleepless night, I decided to dig for answers. If our house had a secret, I was determined to uncover it. While Linda kept Billy occupied downstairs, I grabbed a flashlight and headed up into the attic, the only place we hadn't thoroughly checked. The attic was a cramped, dusty space with rafters hung low and cobwebs clinging to every corner. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating sheet-draped furniture and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Near the far end of the attic, I noticed an old cedar chest that I hadn't checked before. The lid was secured by a rusty latch, but a few hard tugs broke it free. Inside, among moth-eaten linens, I discovered a faded photograph and a leather-bound diary. The photograph showed a stern-faced woman standing on the porch of our house, beside a cheerful little boy in early 1900s clothing. Scrawled on the back were the words, Catherine Ross and her son William, 1901. The diary belonged to Catherine Ross herself. In its frail pages, written in spidery handwriting, she recounted how her beloved 2-year-old son William had died of a sudden fever in 1902. The later entries grew short and frantic. In one, Catherine wrote that she could still hear William crying for her every night. The final entry, dated just weeks after the boy's death, sent a chill through me. I will do what I must to keep him here. I hurried downstairs and showed Linda the evidence I'd found. When we realized Catherine's little boy had died at age 2, the same age as our Billy, we were overcome by a sickening understanding. Catherine's grief-maddened spirit might believe our son was her William, or else she intended to take him as a substitute. We needed help, and fast. That afternoon, I made some calls and knocked on a few doors around town, looking for anyone who might know more about the Ross family or our house's history. Finally, I got a lead. An elderly neighbor named Tom Harris had lived his whole life in the area and knew its folklore like the back of his hand. I phoned him, and as soon as I mentioned our address, his voice grew solemn. He agreed to come over that evening. It was time to confront the truth lurking in our home. Old Tom Harris arrived just before sunset, carrying a worn notebook and a thermos of coffee. We gathered at our kitchen table, the last of the daylight fading to a dreary dusk outside. Tom refused any small talk. The moment he settled in, he fixed us with a sympathetic but grave look. "I'm going to tell you what I know," he began in a low voice, "and it ain't a happy story." With Billy dozing fitfully in Linda's arms and the baby monitor on the table, Tom talked, and we listened in nervous silence. He told us the Ross family had built our farmhouse in the late 1800s and lived there for generations. Hearing that name confirmed everything. We hung on his every word, dread growing by the second. According to Tom, Catherine Ross was a young mother who lived here at the turn of the century. In the winter of 1902, her 2-year-old son William fell ill with a terrible fever and died in his crib, in the very room that is now Billy's nursery. Tom paused, shaking his head. They say Catherine just broke after that, lost her grip on reality. We exchanged uneasy looks as he continued. Catherine became convinced that William's spirit was still in the house. Neighbors often heard her late at night, softly singing lullabies as if to soothe an invisible child. Some even claimed they heard her speaking to little William as though he was still alive. Not long after the boy's death, Catherine herself vanished. Folks finally found her. Tom hesitated, casting a glance toward the ceiling, found her hanging from a beam in the attic, right above where the crib stood. She'd written a message on the wall in her own blood. "Mama will bring you home." They buried her in the church cemetery, but he trailed off, his teacup rattling slightly as he set it down. "But she never really left, did she?" I said quietly, my mouth dry. Tom sighed. "Over the years, that house got a reputation, especially whenever a family with young kids moved in. They wouldn't last long. People heard crying when no child was there, lullabies at midnight. The locals started calling the spirit Mother Midnight, because she'd come round at midnight looking for her child." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Some say Catherine's still searching for her little William, and that she'll latch on to any child she finds." Linda clutched my hand, eyes brimming with tears. "Tom, what does she want with our son?" Tom pressed his lips thin. "Spirits like that, child, they're drawn to what they lost. She probably thinks your Billy is her William, or maybe she aims to take him to replace what she lost." His words landed like a death sentence. I felt myself trembling. As much as I'd guessed the truth, hearing it confirmed out loud was devastating. I pulled Linda close as she stifled a sob. Upstairs, through the monitor, we heard Billy stir and whimper, as if he too sensed our dread. Tom cleared his throat and stood. "Listen, in all my years, I've learned one thing about hauntings. When they get this strong, when they start hurting folks or coming after a child, it's time to leave. You need to get your boy out of here, tonight." We didn't need to be told twice. We both nodded, hearts pounding. "We will," I promised in a shaky voice. The plan was to grab just the essentials and drive straight to Linda's parents' place a few towns over without spending another night under this roof. Before Tom left, he pressed a rosary into my hand and murmured a prayer for our protection. "I'll be up praying for y'all all night," he said at the door, his weathered eyes full of concern. "Now get your things and go, and don't you look back." We thanked him profusely. As he headed down our porch steps into the twilight, a gust of wind rattled the porch swing, its rusty chains groaning. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. We rushed inside to pack. The house felt charged with a frantic energy, as if it knew we were trying to leave. In the kitchen, the lights flickered without warning, plunging us into brief darkness. One of the cabinet doors slammed shut on its own, startling a yelp from Linda. It was like Catherine's spirit had overheard our plan and was furious. "Keep packing," I urged. By 11 p.m. we had thrown our necessities into a duffel bag. Billy was wide awake and fussy, no doubt picking up on our panic as we hurried through the house. Outside, thunder growled. The autumn storm was rolling in fast. Around 11:30, just as I was double-checking, we had Billy's favourite blanket and stuffed bunny. Every light in the house dimmed and went out at once. The sudden darkness was broken only by the blue-white flicker of lightning outside. At that exact moment, the living room radio snapped on by itself, emitting a wash of static. Through that crackling static, the notes of an all-too-familiar lullaby began to play, warping and distorting as if the ghost was mocking us through the speaker. Linda clutched Billy tightly. "Oh, God, please, no," she whimpered. I grabbed the flashlight from our packed bag and flicked it on, but the beam was pathetically weak. "Stay with me," I said, trying to sound calm. "We're leaving now." She nodded, tears glistening on her face. I flung the duffel over my shoulder and led them toward the front door. Billy squirmed and whined in her arms, upset by the dark and the sudden commotion. We were halfway across the living room when every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The bang reverberated through the walls. Linda screamed. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The front door just steps ahead had whipped itself shut as well, and I heard the deadbolt click into place. We were being sealed in. "Go! Try the kitchen door!" I shouted. We spun and ran toward the back of the house, Linda clutching Billy and me right on her heels. A fierce gust of wind blasted down the hallway, though every window was closed. It howled past us, knocking a framed family photo off the wall and sending it crashing to the floor. From upstairs came a new sound that froze my blood. Billy's voice calling out, "Mama, Mama," in a plaintive cry. I stumbled, confused. Billy was in Linda's arms, but somehow I could hear him crying upstairs, followed by a chorus of childish giggles echoing through the dark. It was as if an unseen child were taunting us, mimicking our son's voice. Linda's face was white as chalk. Before I could speak, a shadow swept across the wall at the foot of the stairs, fast and fluid, rushing straight toward us. "Look out!" I shouted. A porcelain lamp on a side table exploded, shards of glass spraying across the hallway. We dropped to a crouch, Linda shielding our screaming toddler. A sharp fragment sliced my forearm. I felt warm blood trickle down to my wrist. Then, in a blinding flash of lightning, she appeared. Catherine. The gaunt figure stood at the bottom of the staircase, illuminated in the stuttering blue light from outside. It was unmistakably the woman from the photograph. I knew that dress, that drawn, hollow face. But now her eyes were empty, pitch-black pits, and her head lolled at an unnatural angle, as if her neck had been broken. Her feet weren't touching the ground. "Give me my baby," a hollow voice rasped. Her lips barely moved. The words vibrated through the air, coming from everywhere at once. Billy shrieked in terror and buried his face in Linda's shoulder. Catherine's ghost floated forward, skeletal hands outstretched. I instinctively moved in front of my wife and child. "Stay back!" I bellowed, my voice shaking. I thrust Tom's rosary out in front of me. A bolt of lightning lit up the foyer, immediately followed by a window-rattling boom of thunder. The entire house shuddered. For a split second, the spectre recoiled, her form flickering in the harsh flash of light. It was only a brief hesitation, but it was enough. "Run!" I shouted. Linda clutched Billy and sprinted for the kitchen door. I was right behind her. A shriek of pure rage erupted behind us, a sound like a whirlwind tearing through the house. The large front window shattered inward, spraying glass as a furious gust of wind sent curtains flying. Cabinet doors in the kitchen banged open and shut, and cutlery drawers flew out, their contents clattering across the tiles. Linda fumbled desperately with the kitchen doorknob, sobbing, "Please, please!" I threw my shoulder against the door alongside her, and with a scream of hinges, the heavy door wrenched open against some invisible force trying to keep it shut. We plunged out into the storm-lashed night, cold rain slicing at our skin. Behind us, from deep within the house, we heard an otherworldly wail, a cry of despair and fury that rose above the howling wind. We didn't stop running. I fished the car keys from my pocket as we dashed to the station wagon in the driveway. Rain pelted the roof and thunder rumbled constantly overhead. I yanked the back door open and practically threw Linda and Billy into the back seat. Then I dove into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition with trembling hands. The engine coughed, "Come on, please," and then roared to life. I rammed the car into reverse, wheels spitting mud as I backed wildly down the drive. A jagged streak of lightning lit up the yard. In that flash, I glimpsed the upstairs nursery window. Catherine's gaunt face was pressed against the glass, her black eyes locked on us. She opened her mouth in a soundless scream that pierced directly into my mind. I swear I could feel her rage and grief as we tore away down the road. Billy was wailing in the back seat, and I pressed the accelerator to the floor. Our tires spun on the slick road before finally finding traction, and then we sped off into the stormy darkness, leaving that accursed farmhouse behind. We drove through the storm in silence, hearts pounding in our chests. Eventually, Billy cried himself to sleep in Linda's arms, and she too closed her eyes in exhausted relief. A fragile hope began to form. Perhaps we had truly escaped. But just as I allowed myself to breathe again, I heard it, a soft sound under the patter of rain on the roof. My heart climbed into my throat. It was humming, a gentle, lilting hum coming from the back seat. In the rearview mirror, I could see my son strapped in his car seat, fast asleep with his head resting limp against Linda. His lips were slightly parted, and an unfamiliar woman's voice was humming through them, a lullaby melody coming from my 2-year-old's mouth. The tune was unmistakable, that same old folk lullaby. Cold dread washed over me, colder than the night rain. I opened my mouth to speak, to wake my wife, but no sound came out. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel. In the mirror, another flash of lightning illuminated the back seat. For one split second, I thought I saw someone else sitting beside Billy. A faint outline of a woman with a high-collared dress and hollow eyes, gently stroking his hair. I jerked my gaze back to the road, heart hammering erratically. When I glanced up at the mirror again, the shape was gone. Only my sleeping child and unconscious wife were there, drenched in the intermittent red glow of our taillights. I bit back a sob and forced my eyes on the rain-slick asphalt ahead. I didn't dare stop the car. What would I even do if I did? Instead, I drove on through the storm, clutching the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror and whispering desperate prayers under my breath. We never went back to that farmhouse. In fact, we never even returned to town. We couldn't. But as the miles stretched behind us and the first pale light of dawn crept into the sky, an awful, unshakable truth settled in my bones. Some nightmares follow you wherever you go. In the silence of the car, beneath the rumble of the engine and the distant grumble of retreating thunder, I could hear the faintest echo of a lullaby humming from the back seat. A mother's gentle song, promising that Mother Midnight was never far behind. If you ever hear a lullaby in the middle of the night, and you know no one in your home is singing, don't follow it. Some spirits don't want peace. They want their children back. And sometimes they'll take yours to get them. Some lullabies never fade. Some mothers never let go.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.